I'm so happy to introduce my friend Dana White. Dana is an incredibly humble man, and it's really annoying because it means he, as he will tell you, he likes to stay in the background of things, and that's great. And he does magical work in the background, in between things, putting people together and making things happen. And he's done that for us, and we count him a friend of the institution, and I count him a personal friend. But it is really annoying because he has a lot to say. I wish you'd been in the office with me just now as we were talking about life and wisdom and the things you exchange for soul and life and place of money, you know, what you give up to get by, things like that. Really wise and honorable man. And I just knew him as a friend. I knew he had a PhD from Pacifica Graduate Institute. But I didn't know all this until he gave me this amazing article, by the way, in the Journal of the Earth, which is a Harvard publication. Is that right? Yeah. See, so humbled, so annoying. Listen to this. I didn't know any of this, Dana, because you're so annoying. Okay, PhD in Mythological Studies, emphasis in depth psychology, MA in Communications Management from the Annenberg School, at a little school called USC, bachelor's degree in philosophy from Occidental College, just over here. He is a Renaissance man. You know, I knew he was a good, kind, wise man. He's a Renaissance man. Listen to this. Author, editor, photographer, artist, print designer, marketing executive, communications director, environmentalist. He's an amazing photographer. His photographs have been used in 100 books, more than 100 books, and his large-scale photo collages have been exhibited and collected. Director of the Campaign to Clear the Air. You never told me about this. Campaign to Clear the Air. He produced 3 short films about poor air quality in Southern California with the support of Southern California Gas and South Coast Air Quality Management. The films were shown in more than 350 California theaters. His past clients have included the U.S. Forest Service, Coldwell Banker, McGraw-Hill Education, Kaiser Permanente, and Pepperdine. He's currently the editor and designer of the Mythic Moment series of books written by Dr. F. Gard Jameson, Phaethon, published in 2009, and Monkey, Journey to the West. I have a couple of books on my desk that he's given me. He is married to his wife, Michelle, has 2 sons. He has a Tibetan Terrier named Bodhi, right? Avid marathon runner. Really? A marathon runner, okay. Gourmet cook. You've never... I'm reading it. And dog lover. Yeah, so Luca's here. I'm sure Luca will find you. Dana, you served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam? Okay, as a naval petty officer. Okay. He remains an adjunct professor at Pacifica Graduate Institute, teaching courses in mythological studies and the graduate program on psyche and nature, and serving on dissertation committees. He's here tonight to talk to you about 0 to infinity and back again. Please welcome Dr. Dana White.
You embarrass me one more time.
I am so happy to embarrass you.
All right. About a month ago, a friend of mine and I were having a discussion in my kitchen about knowledge and wisdom. And it seemed to us that after this, we certainly did not equate the two. In fact, we saw them as really having different orders of magnitude. So I went on the internet thinking there must be an article or something about knowledge and wisdom. And I came across a poem that was a few lines out of T.S. Eliot. So I went to my book, or a book that I have by T.S. Eliot, and when I opened it, there was a bookmark from a previous time that I had found the same poem. I was stunned. I didn't remember when I'd gone there or what that had been about or how I'd found it. But I thought I would start that off, this evening off, with reading a little bit from that, or at least the lines that relate to that. The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness. Knowledge of speech, but not of silence. Knowledge of words and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to our ignorance. All our ignorance brings us nearer to death. But nearness to death, no nearer to God. Where is the life we have lost in the living? Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge that we have lost in the information? And I was stunned by the fact that it just seems to set up how we have made a priority of knowledge and not of wisdom. We don't really speak about knowledge traditions. We speak about wisdom traditions. But yet in our cultures and in our schools, we've really drawn ourselves down the path of information, data, and knowledge. Now let's see if I can make this work. So when we start out as the project called Humanity, I was struck by that image of the ape that Greg showed in the 2001 movie, where the ape suddenly picks up the stick or the bone and shatters it, and his senses are completely distraught and disturbed, and he realizes something. That moment of realization is the spark of the separate self. And when we separate from the participation mystique, in which there are no differentiations, and there's nothing to separate us from anything in the cosmos, we go down that path, and we've been going down that path ever since. The thing that we left behind in that path is the soul. And the soul remains there tied to the infinite oneness of the participation mystique. And the soul is something we can't outrun. In fact, it follows us to this day, wherever we are. So tonight, what I'm going to do is try to follow where the personality and the separate self have taken us, and how we can go through all of the iterations that we do to find the path of reuniting with the separate self, with the soul that we left behind, so that we bring back and find ourselves at the place that we started, but somehow it's different. It's the same place, but it's different. We recognize it, but it's different. Ancient cultures were all nature-based. They took their gods out of the nature. They were sustainable because there was no business in outrunning nature. There was nothing to do, no place to go. All they had to do was evolve within the context of now the evolving separate self and the community that was developing around them. And in the course of doing that, they developed their myths, they found their languages, they found their songs. Whatever they did, they developed in relation to the natural world. And the tools that they used to do this were memory and imagination. The one thing that we now have is we have human consciousness. And however, even today that we look one way and we have memory, and we look another way, we have imagination. But in reality, it's all imagination, because we can never recapture the memory except through the present moment. Whatever is present is the still point around which the entire dance takes place. Even today, as then, we have the sense of chaos. And one of our missions and one of our purposes is to define a sense of order within the chaos. It doesn't eliminate the chaos, but the chaos is ever present. And within that ever presence, we find our narrative, our orality. In the very beginning, this oral nature gave us our stories. And in the early stories, I stole your image, I found it. This is Odysseus, and he was leaving the Battle of Troy and returning home to Ithaca. The stories give us a grounding in reality. And wherever it is that we are, we need a story. If we don't have a story, we have the story of no story. But story is the defining characteristic of what makes us human. And that humanity is something that works all the way back to the very beginning, to our roots and to our archetypal nature. It winds its way all the way back to the soul that never left us. And that soul knows where we are. As far as we leave home, it still remains like a tether, a place that gives us solid ground and footing. Throughout our evolution as people, we've constructed initiations and rites. And one of the things that we have found ourselves growing away from in our modern cultures is the sense that the rites and initiations don't mean anything, or that you can buy them, or that having something is sufficient to replace the need for a rite. But ancient cultures saw, like with the Eleusinian mysteries, they would go into a dark space, open themselves up, and they would see what came through the darkness. In the search for meaning and substance, what we encounter is the tendency to go either toward the light or toward the dark. And in the light, we find the rational mind. We find the images before us. We find the past. But in the darkness, we find the unconscious. We find the dreams. We find the archetypes. And we find the path to the soul. If we look carefully, we'll follow the path of the sun and the moon. Right now, as we are here, we're in the middle of a really dramatic moon that is called the worm moon. Called the worm moon because it was named so because this is when the earthworms come from the earth. And it's a very powerful moon. I don't know if any of you are predisposed to lunar variations or you get kind of weird on the full moon, but I do. And the thought that this, well, my wife will tell you, the 3 or 4 days before a full moon, it's like I can be hell to live with. I churn, I am short-tempered. I don't try to be, but it does happen. And I can feel it right now. There's an anxiety that permeates this, and it's all moon-related. Day after the full moon, it'll be gone, you know? I began to observe this when I was really young, maybe 7th or 8th grade. There were days when I really felt extroverted. I felt like I could go play. I felt like I could sell. Felt like I could produce. And then there were days where I just felt like being by myself. I just couldn't handle people. And as I went through my life, I began to notice that these weren't just variations, they occurred at specific times. And as I looked at them, I realized these are occurring on the moon cycles. They're occurring before the full moon and before the empty moon. Now I know that, but at the time it was just completely unfamiliar territory for me. I have found that it's a part of knowing myself, of me coming to terms with who I am and trying to live within the boundaries of that and trying to carve out a life in a culture that doesn't care about that. You know, if I'm having a pre-moon day, I still have to go to work or I still have to deliver something on deadline. And it's hard. It's hard to do work when you don't feel like being around people. During these periods of times, my dreams are just off the charts. I mean, I get dreams that lack context, dreams that are situational, dreams that I don't know. They're only way I can describe them is the images are archetypal. They're forces. They're things that line up inside me and don't release me. In ancient times, there would be shaman that would take the culture or answer these questions. But today we don't have people like that. I mean, we have therapists and we have friends, but we really are struggling with how to deal with the darker side of things. So a good way to portray these two opposites is that we have light and dark forces within us. And the Native Americans have a story about the dark wolf and the light wolf. And the story goes that these forces are inside us doing battle. And they kind of tear at each other. The light wolf sees things. The light wolf opens doors and connects with people, makes relations, makes us happy. The dark wolf tears at us. It really is a good defensive mechanism because it wards off people and it kind of sets up boundaries. The question would be, which wolf survives the fight? And the answer is the one you feed. Whichever wolf, whichever force is inside you that you decide you're going to honor, that's the one that's going to take precedence. Now, the wisdom traditions will tell you that it's better to keep them both alive. You don't put one out to pasture. You don't cage it. You don't bottle it up. You allow them to have a dialogue and a tension between them and let that tension come out. Because in the tension between the opposing forces, what you have is you have the way in which oppositions, which are part of our natural nature, they come out. Each opposition that we have is a way for us to make the most of our situation. They produce energy, they produce conflict, they produce adrenaline, and they produce solution. We cannot avoid the natural nature of strife and love. These attractions and repulsions are energies that divide us and draw us together. And we find our tribe in the kind of energies that are related to our oppositions. Each opposition is a kind of a dualism, and in our particular culture, we're driven to light. We're driven to size. We're driven to more. We're driven to accumulation. The values that we place upon these create cultural tensions that drive us away from our cultural still point. All of our desires take us away from the silence that is inside us at the moment of soul that we left at the very beginning when the separate self was created. But the separate self has to exist. It has to find a way to coexist with not only the soul that's inside us, but the separate self itself. So toward that end, the ancient Greeks understood that at Delphi, the wisdom came from knowing oneself. Know thyself. We don't particularly practice that in this culture. We practice study hard, be better, get rich, and surround yourself with like-minded people who won't topple your edifice. Now, the soul that I spoke about is in a kind of an incubator. It continues throughout the course of history and throughout our lives, and it continues to manifest and stir within us. There's a British writer doing a lot of great work today called Peter Kingsley, and he writes about incubation, and he talks about how the ancients seemed to grasp the idea that this soul had an eternal nature to it, that long after the body died and long after the psyche gave up the ghost within the body, the soul continued. Now, like anything else, it's a belief, but you choose the beliefs that you get to live by, and each of those beliefs affects the quality of your life. Within our separate selves, we have ways that we can move forward. In a way, what we are is inhabited by archetypes. Archetypes of motion, archetypes of control, archetypes of submission, relation, fear, trust. Archetypes are manifest according to birth order. They're manifest according to where you live. The kinds of circumstances of your life can bring forth one archetype rather than another. In a way, it's like the human soul and the separate self are ways that the gods play with us. And what they do is that they contrive a life in which we can find meaning, but so can they. And if you think about the gods as existing rather than concepts in which the human mind plays, then it begins to take shape that the human life is something of a playground. It's something that we can recreate in. It's something we can express ourselves with. We have moved from a human orientation of the earth to the sky. And this came about largely as we moved from polytheism, where the natural world and all of the elements and the seasons and the changes and what have you, to the sky where we have monotheism and we have one God encompassing all of them. In the same move, what we've been able to do as human beings is shift the emphasis from the earth to the sky and from the heart to the head. We privilege the rational mind. In our culture, we praise intelligence, smart people, people who know a lot of stuff. I think it's worth looking at, where does feeling and where does soul and where does substance and character fit into that? When you go for a job, what are you going to tell them? I think the proudest thing that Greg said about me was my two sons. I had a situation, I was telling Greg, I had an epiphany. I was about to have my first son, and I was driving home in the middle of the night, and there I was. It was actually at the corner of Olympic and Westwood Boulevard. And it was like a light went on. I mean, it was a flash. And I said, here I am in the middle of the night. My kid's about to be born, and I'm on this important assignment that's got to get done by morning. What am I doing? Why am I out here? So I went home, got up the next morning, walked back into the company that I was working for, and I said, I'm out of here. I'm going to take a year off, and we'll see what happens. Took a year off, had my kid. I will say, taking a year off for a newborn does something for me. I don't know if it does anything for the newborn, but I really found that as adults, we spend an awful lot of time in non-essential work when we're caught up in the workplace. We're not defined by the work we do. We're not defined by anything other than the output we give them. They don't care who we are or what we think or how we feel. And to me, that was the way I wanted to raise my kids, was in a feeling-based family situation. I wanted them to know that I was not the father that I was raised with. And I will say this, that 30 some odd years later, I get invited on their vacations. They'll show up, we'll go to concerts together, we'll do camping trips together. I mean, it's very cool to have friends as your sons that you can do things with. I didn't have that kind of a relationship, but I was unwilling to give my life over to my head. I don't think I would have been that good at it, but I was better at living by my heart. In a world of living by your head, though, you're surrounded by reason, by sciences. It gives you a lot of control over everything. The article that Greg referenced was called Out of Control. And it just seems to me that everything that we've done to construct myths has prepared us for having an understanding or giving us control over the world in which we find ourselves. But they're all human-centered. All of the myths take relation to the human being. Joseph Campbell talks about the 4 functions of mythology, and the first is the mystical or religious experience. We want to feel that the world is sacred. We want to feel that the world has a purpose, that it supports our being. Beyond that, there's the cosmological myth or the reference, and this is just what in the world is existence about? How do we find purpose and a meaningful existence within the entire cosmos? Back down to earth, we have a culture. And whether we're Chinese, Japanese, or American, or Mexican, or Canadian, our home is part of our mythology. And it serves us to get to know that. And within the culture, we have our own psychological well-being. And we have to cope with how we make ourselves within these other three mythologies. To some extent, our goal is to become self-reliant. We don't want to find ourselves dependent or codependent as much as interdependent. We're woven into each other's lives. And whether we like it or not, that's a simple fact. Our existences find one another wherever they are. I've started a monthly salon in my home in Santa Monica. It's called the Myth Salon. I gave myself over to this, and I've invited artists, professors, tarot people who have something to say, because I feel connected to them. Once I meet somebody who is willing to tell me their story, I'm drawn to who they are, because something in me pre-existed that story being told to me. But self-reliance is a way of self-separating. I'm not separate from the reality in which I find myself. In fact, I'm created by it. I resist patriarchy. I find patriarchy is a false narrative that sets up dominion and control, and a sense that that dominion and that control is authorized, or it's entitled, or whatever word you want to use, that this is some way that we are prescribed and a way for us to be. And for whatever reason, it's something that our particular culture seems embedded in now more than ever. It seems as if patriarchy is flying a flag and it is enlisting full-blown support. Over time, as we've evolved, it is a challenge for us to find our own personal path to authenticity. The narrative of frontiers has been written into the way that our particular culture is. We believe that if there is a frontier out there, it should be crossed. If there's something that should be built, it ought to be built. Well, the reality of a self separated from the world is the first step to believing that the world has no limits. And the fact is, the world does have limits. There are population problems, there are resource limits, and there is scarcity of everything. It's the nature of physical existence. But that flies in the face of progress. And the progress is written in the sense that more is better. If we did that this year, we need to do more next year. If you learn something now, you need to learn the next thing. And it pushes us on to become falsely educated and believing in wherever we go, we can do better. And sometimes enough is enough. We are where we are, and this isn't a bad place to be. We can make this place just fine. We don't need to constantly improve or move to new boundaries and new achievements. Human beings have taught themselves languages that reflect the psychic condition of the spirits of the times. Jung talks about these spirits of the times as being the context in which the soul is articulated at any given time. And it's important that we recognize what those spirits are. And in order to find them, we use memory, but we give ourselves over to the spirits of the times and find ourselves listening to them as a way of finding out what is the path to unify it and how do we separate ourselves or retain our diversity. Our diversity and our lack of unification are two sides of the same coin. As we move forward, if we reconcile those two, we can find ourselves living in harmony without having to eliminate one another in the process of finding ourselves all coexisting. A while back, Greg used the way of describing truth. And truth is really unknowable. I may have a truth, but even the truth that I know is disappeared into the fabric of time over time. But we think we know truth because we're using memory as a way of accessing it. And I struggle with the idea of even raising truth to the idea of something that could be unchanging. I am recalling the Kennedy assassination with the Zapruder films, and they used those films as a way of talking about what happened at Kennedy's assassination. Well, 20 or 25 years after the fact, with Photoshop, nothing is convincing. You could have created any kind of thing, and there's no way in a court of law today that you could introduce a piece of film as a piece of evidence. What we trade are perspectives. And if we live in perspectives and projections, we find that wherever we shine the light on one thing, we have created shadow on something else. We don't see the complete picture. We don't have the complete picture. We're like people walking around the various sides of an elephant, touching the leg or the trunk or the tail or what have you. We need to understand that everything about the human condition is limited. There are no eternities. There is nothing completely expansive or covering it. All we are left with is opinion. Even our knowledge falls into opinion, and it affects what we think we know, which is why something like alchemy is really a crucial way of understanding who we are in the context, because it incorporates the self. Descartes wanted to eliminate the self and come up with the cogito, which is, I think, therefore I am, as if that proves anything. The reality of it is I am that I am. I am part of this equation. And you cannot eliminate the subject from any equation. The perceiving mind creates what is seen. And so the inside and the outside are part of a conjunctio, a situation that requires both an inside and an outside. If you were completely on the inside, you would be back where the participation mystique was. You'd be the fish inside the bowl. But we're not. We have this dual nature of being inside and outside. And as long as we retain that as part of our thinking mind, we can get to the reality of the essence and the form. Plato realized that in looking at something like a chair or an apple or some physical part of the world, there were archetypes and forms that allowed that thing to be what it was, but also archetypes that allowed us to recognize it for what it is. Today, what we live with is a world of accumulation and identification, attachment, and limits. We project ourselves according to those. We are tempted to define value according to how much we make, how big a house, how we dress, how much education we have. Those sorts of values are really ephemeral. And they're a moment in time. It's like running a race and defining yourself by that performance. It disappears the moment it's finished. Now, I've got 2 more slides, and then I want to do a little archetypal experiment with you. I had a brief flurry with educational administration. And one of the things that's been making the news today is the bribery that's going on with the University of Southern California. The idea of paying to get your kid into some prestige school. I dealt with a different problem at the other end, which was the admissions counselors talking to parents of unqualified students, encouraging them to mortgage their homes, take out loans, and incur debt as a way of placing their hope in a student who would never complete the program. And they were manufacturing student loans like it was going out of style. I left the school after about a year under a lot of protest. We had good programs, but we couldn't keep pace. We couldn't keep the scholarship at pace with the student loans. And it was really disturbing that they continued to do this. There's a movie called Failed State on Netflix that if you want to see something about the for-profit educational industry, it takes them all to task on that. But they're marketing self-development through these schools as if somehow or another these kids will come out of there and they will find out who they are in the course of developing their education. The reality of it is by focusing on grades and money-making careers, they're ignoring who the kids are. They're not seeing the kids or the need to authenticate the personality of the students as being at all important. So what do we need to do? The first is, if you are out there navigating a terrain, and the terrain seems to have false indications about where it is that we think we ought to go, lose the map. Wander. Take a journey on your own. Take some time. This was what I did when my first kid was born. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one place I wasn't going. And that change made all the difference in the world. If you're young enough to still be in school and you're looking at the program that you're in, look at yourself, not the program. Careers change, the employment sector changes. Whatever you think you want to do, consider that it evolves around you. And the issue is festina lente, make haste slowly. This was the corporate or the publication slogan of Aldus Manutius, a 15th century Venetian printer who printed the books, the Bibles that Greg mentioned during the pre-Reformation that led to the formation of the vernacular languages and changed the world that we live in forever. But he saw what he had done by doing that, by releasing these Bibles and creating these vernacular languages that the world had never seen, breaking it apart from the church. He knew he had unleashed something. So he said, festina lente, go slowly. Make haste, but go slowly. So he set the priorities. He set the priorities not around speed, but around substance. Substance always takes a little bit longer, and its goals are a little amorphous, but they last and they feel better. So what I'd like to do is step back a second and let's talk about archetypes. Now, if you have a piece of paper, I'm going to put up here 7 different symbols. And I'll go through them right now if you want to draw them. There's a spiral, a circle, a square, an upwards triangle, a downwards triangle, an equal sign, is that 6? And a cross. So let's go through them. A spiral has been long typified as a symbol of unbridled evolution. It appears in virtually every culture throughout the world as one of those uncontained, varying, it goes up and down. It's the soul's journey. It's the journey of a person throughout an entire lifetime, and it wanders around. It's like a ribbon in the wind. A circle is a symbol for wholeness. And what it does, again, these all are archetypal symbols that stretch back 1,000 or more years. And that you would find them on walls, we find them in cave paintings. And what they symbolize is man's reach for a symbol to communicate that which is beyond the symbol. So that the symbol is not a sign, it's an arrow. It's pointing beyond itself. The moon is just as big a symbol. The moon comes up, and when it goes down, they see it as a symbol of wholeness. It becomes less whole and then more whole, month after month. And sometimes somebody like Escher will stare into that, and what do you think he sees in that orb that he holds? He sees himself. The square symbolizes order, containment, logic, in a way, soullessness. It also really it works because of its principle, its deep adherence to principle. It's the reason why you can look at an org chart and say, oh, that conforms to order. It's the way man's intelligence works, is categories. Equality is one of the things that people think about, oh, we all want to be equal. Well, we're not all equal. We're all unique. Equality and uniqueness don't work hand in hand. Uniqueness is we are all equally unique, but we are not all equal. Equality conforms to a kind of sameness, a sort of, even in nature, no two rocks, no two trees, no two leaves, no two fish, no two anything in nature are alike, no two snowflakes. But yet human beings have been able to construct the idea of equality, and the reality can't exist. The cross is one of those symbols. It's a symbol that suggests choice, moving into a crossroads, an intersection, opposites, quaternity. But it can also be appropriated as a symbol for religion. And in so doing, it can conform to the notion of the spire or the triangle, upward pointing triangle, which is about achievement, domination, reaching to the sky. The upward pointing triangle has been fashioned as a religious point in architecture. It's a corporate architecture. It's about one over many. It's about fewer at the top and more at the bottom. In a way, it's the very symbol of American capitalism. Then you have the downward triangle, which is feminine. I should also mention that the upward triangle is decidedly masculine. So it's a patriarchal symbol. The downward triangle is its opposite, and it's a feminine sign, a reflective sign, going into a deep space, contemplating, reflecting. So now you've got 7 of these symbols. If you take those symbols and you process them, either now or later, or take them home with you, what you come up with is an ordering. The ones that you put at the top and the ones that you put at the bottom are clearly the ones that you either prioritize or negate. You resonate with the ones closer to the top all the way down to the bottom. The point of this is that this is a window to that archetypal soul that we left way back at the participation mystique. That soul never leaves you, no matter how old you get, no matter where you go. It's something that accompanies you on every journey that you'll ever have. And if you come up with a way to articulate or visualize the soul as saying, I think I like change over relation or wholeness or whatever. Wherever you are, there you are. And you have to take that with you. You can't want to be somewhere else and then find yourself on a path that you're not on. You can't live by somebody else's archetypes. You have to find the ones that inhabit you. And as James Hillman, a depth psychologist, would say, each of these is a voice, and each of them deserves a voice, like the white wolf and the dark wolf. They all want to have a seat at the table. Well, that's pretty much what I've got. So I want to thank you, and I thank you, Greg. I didn't know how this would go. I think I'll know. I made it to the end. I have a lot of work to do in terms of, following a master. But if I listen to myself, I'm liable to learn how to do better. But I will model myself after you, Greg. I appreciate all that you do for this institution and for our culture. And I'm honored to be up here on the stage where I can only imagine the people who have stood up here. I'm humbled by that. It's that somebody with diminished capacities would be able to stand up here and do this. This is really incredible. So thank you all very much.